they shut me down. I got several certified lawyer letters, saying, you can't do that. You can't be on YouTube. You can't be on here doing that. I'm like, guys, this legitimizes me as a real business, not just a TV show.
Gas Monkey Garage was one of the busiest places on television. Richard Rawlings and his crew bought beat-up cars, tore them apart, rebuilt them under impossible deadlines, and somehow turned the chaos into a hit show. But eventually, the machine started wearing down the people inside it. Aaron Kaufman left. Richard's relationship with the show changed. Even the business behind the cameras began moving in a different direction. By the time Fast and Loud finally disappeared, the ending had been years in the making. But where did it all start going wrong, and what finally pushed the show past the point of no return? Join us as we trace the story from the beginning. The handshake that started it all. Back in 2002, a guy named Richard Rawlings opened up a little car shop in Dallas, Texas, and called it Gas Monkey Garage. At the time, it was just a shop, nothing fancy. Just a place where a car guy could work on cars he loved. 10 years later, in 2012, the Discovery Channel walked in and saw something worth putting on television. They turned that little shop into a show called Fast and Loud, and almost overnight, it became one of the biggest hits on the network. The idea behind the show was simple, and honestly, kind of brilliant. Richard would go out and look for some beat-up old classic car, usually something rusted, broken down, and forgotten. Then his shop would fix it up, sometimes lightly, sometimes with a full custom makeover, and sell it for way more than they paid. Richard brought the hustle. He was loud, confident, and always chasing the next big deal. But the person actually doing most of the hands-on work, the guy turning rusty junk into something that actually ran, was a mechanic named Aaron Kaufman. Together, these two became one of the most famous duos on reality television. Richards was the dealmaker, while Aaron was the builder. Fans loved watching them work, argue, and watch a pile of scrap metal slowly turn into something beautiful, all before the end of a single episode. For years and years, this formula just worked. The show ran for season after season, building a massive, loyal fan base who tuned in every single week to watch what junker would get saved next. There was a real chemistry between the two of them too, the kind that's genuinely hard to fake for a camera. Richard would come roaring in with some wild new deal he'd just made, usually involving a car that looked more like scrap metal than an actual vehicle. And Aaron would just look at it, shake his head a little, and somehow figure out exactly how to bring it back to life. That contrast, the fast-talking dealmaker and the quiet, steady mechanic, was the entire engine that powered the show for years. Around them, a whole cast of other personalities filled out the shop, too. Christy Brimberry, who handled a lot of the shop's back-office work, became a fan favorite in her own right. So did other regular faces who came and went over the years, each one adding a little more texture to the world Discovery was building on screen. That's part of why the show worked as well as it did for as long as it did. It wasn't just two guys and some cars. It was a whole little community, one that felt lived in and real, even under the bright lights of television production. The show also found a home well beyond just weekly cable ratings. Builds from Gas Monkey Garage started showing up at massive, nationally televised car auctions. Places like Barrett-Jackson, where completed vehicles would sell for eye-popping sums in front of cheering crowds. That gave the show a satisfying, almost sports-like climax built right into its DNA. But here's the thing about formulas that work really well on television. They're often built on a foundation that's a lot more stressful than it looks on screen. And eventually, that stress started cracking the foundation right down the middle. The mechanic who walked first. The first real sign that something was wrong came in 2017, and it came from the guy nobody expected to leave, Aaron Kaufman. In a March episode that year, Aaron sat down and told Richard, right there on camera, that he was done. He'd just come back from a short break, and instead of going back to work like normal, he said something that stunned fans watching at home. "My vacation from Gas Monkey is going to be a permanent one." So, why did he leave? Aaron had grown deeply frustrated with how the show's format was boxing in his actual work. He wanted to build big, ambitious, complicated cars, the kind of projects that take real time to do right. But television doesn't really work that way. A TV schedule needs a finished car by a certain date, whether the mechanic thinks it's truly ready or not. Aaron put it plainly himself, telling a reporter that he wanted to build cars that were big and complicated, while the show needed cars that were much smaller and simpler to finish quickly. The math behind that pressure gets even clearer once you look at the actual workload. The crew was expected to finish roughly 12 builds every 6 months. That's not a normal job. That's barely sustainable for anybody, no matter how much they love the work itself. It's not just physically exhausting. That kind of pace eventually wears down even the most passionate person's love for the actual craft. It wasn't purely about workload, though. Aaron also opened up later about the personal side of things. In an interview years afterward, he admitted that he and Richard had simply started having a hard time being in the same building together. Richard, for his part, didn't dig into the details much publicly. He posted a short note on the Gas Monkey Garage blog saying Aaron had been part of the shop since day one, and that moving forward without him would be a painful process, adding that he wanted to keep the drama away from the cameras. After leaving, Aaron didn't just disappear. He tried building his own show called Shifting Gears with Aaron Kaufman, giving him the freedom to build the kind of bigger, slower projects he'd always wanted to make. But that show only lasted about a year, partly because it shifted so dramatically in tone away from the fast-paced excitement that made Fast and Loud so popular in the first place. Losing Aaron was a real blow to the show. He wasn't just a mechanic in the background. To a lot of fans, he was the heart of the whole operation, the quiet, steady counterweight to Richard's big personality. But Aaron's exit turned out to be only the first crack in a much bigger problem, one that had nothing to do with mechanics or builds at all, and everything to do with the fine print Richard had signed years earlier, long before either of them had any idea how big this show would actually become. The contract that boxed Richard in. Here's something most fans never knew while the show was still airing. Richard Rawlings was, in a lot of ways, trapped by his own contract with Discovery. It's a strange thing to picture. On screen, Richard looked like the most powerful guy in the room every single episode. Behind the scenes, in a lot of ways, he had less control over his own career than a brand new employee sweeping the floors. He just didn't talk about it publicly, because doing so would have cost him real money. Years after the show ended, Richard finally opened up about it during an appearance on The Joe Rogan Experience, a popular podcast, back in December 2020. He explained that when he first signed his deal with Discovery, he basically signed away control of nearly everything connected to his own public image. He couldn't post whatever he wanted on his own social media. He couldn't even snap a photo of a car he'd just bought and share it online without first getting permission. Think about how strange that is. This is a guy whose entire brand was built around being loud, confident, and larger than life. And yet, for years, he couldn't fully control his own voice online because of a contract he'd signed long before social media had become such a big deal. Back in 2012, when the deal was first put together, nobody could have predicted just how important platforms like Instagram and YouTube would eventually become for building and keeping a personal brand alive. According to the interview, the contract even included a penalty clause. If Richard publicly said anything bad about Discovery, he could be fined up to $25,000 every single time it happened. And it wasn't just a temporary thing tied to the show still airing either. That fine could still apply even after Richard had left the network entirely, meaning he had to be careful about what he said even once the whole thing was already over. And Richard eventually got frustrated. He later admitted he felt like he'd hit the top of the mountain with Discovery. In plain words, he'd taken the show and the brand about as far as it could go inside that particular deal. He wanted to branch out, start his own automotive podcast, and build things on his own terms. But being locked exclusively into Discovery meant none of that was really possible while the show was still running. This frustration had actually been building for a while before he finally spoke about it publicly. Back in 2018, Richard filed an actual lawsuit against Discovery Communications, claiming the network was limiting his ability to make business deals outside of the show. The case eventually got settled, but it's a pretty clear sign that things between Richard and his own network had already started fraying years before fans ever noticed anything was wrong on screen. But contracts and legal fights weren't the only things happening behind the scenes. There were also questions swirling about just how real some of what viewers were watching every week actually was. Behind the wrench, behind the curtain. Reality television has a bit of a reputation problem, and Fast and Loud wasn't immune to it. Over the years, several former employees suggested that not everything shown on screen was quite as spontaneous as it looked. Some claimed that a handful of the featured car restorations weren't entirely finished inside Gas Monkey Garage itself, with parts of the work allegedly completed by outside shops before being presented to viewers as in-house builds. There were also reports that some of the show's tightest, most dramatic deadlines were set up to create tension for the cameras, rather than reflecting how the actual shop naturally worked. None of that stopped fans from loving Richard's personality, though. Even the parts of it that occasionally rubbed people the wrong way. Some viewers over the years pushed back on how Richard sometimes treated members of his own staff on camera, including a handful of visible flashes of temper. Whether those moments were genuine frustration or exaggerated for dramatic effect became its own ongoing debate among longtime fans, one that never really got a clear answer either way. That's often how it goes with a strong, larger-than-life television personality. Combine all of that, the questions about authenticity, the occasional flashes of tension between Richard and his crew, and the growing frustration over his restrictive contract, and you start to see a much fuller picture than the simple ratings went down story fans were originally left to assume. This wasn't one single problem building toward the end. It was several different pressures, personal, financial, and creative, all stacking up on top of each other at the exact same time. A show doesn't usually end because of just one thing going wrong. It ends because a whole bunch of smaller cracks finally connect into one big one. And then, right as all of that pressure was already building, the entire world outside the shop changed in a way absolutely nobody saw coming. 2020 changed everything. By early 2020, Fast and Loud had already been on the air for about 8 years. Then, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and suddenly, everything about how television got made had to change. Film crews couldn't gather safely the way they used to. Production schedules across the entire entertainment industry ground to a halt, or slowed way down. It was, honestly, a strange and uncertain time for almost every business on the planet, and Gas Monkey Garage was no exception. The show's final episode actually aired on June 8, 2020, almost exactly 8 years to the day after the very first episode had premiered, back in June of 2012. There's something almost poetic about that timing, even if nobody planned it that way. 8 years to the day, the story quietly closed the loop it had opened back in 2012, even though nobody watching that final episode actually knew it was the last one. But here's the strange part. At the time, nobody officially said the show was over. There was just silence. Fans waited for news about a 17th season that never came. Some assumed COVID was simply delaying production, the same way it was delaying so many other shows at the time. Message boards and fan groups online spent months speculating, with theories ranging from a temporary pandemic pause to rumors of behind-the-scenes conflict, none of which were officially confirmed one way or the other. That kind of extended silence tends to be worse for fans than an actual announcement, honestly. At least with a real answer, people can process it and move on. Months of not knowing just leave everybody stuck in limbo, refreshing the same forums over and over, hoping for news that never comes. It wasn't until months later, in December of 2020, that the real answer finally came out, and it came from an unexpected place, a podcast. Richard sat down with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience, and Rogan, being the straightforward interviewer he's known for, asked Richard directly what had actually happened to the show. Richard didn't dance around the question. "I've exited Discovery, and I'm a free agent." Richard described the whole situation as something close to a perfect storm. He'd already been feeling stuck for a while, boxed in by that restrictive contract, frustrated that he couldn't pursue the podcast and business ideas he wanted. Losing Aaron years earlier had already changed the show's chemistry in a big way. Add in a global pandemic disrupting the entire television industry at the exact same moment Richard was already rethinking his future, and suddenly walking away didn't seem like such a hard decision anymore. Richard basically described 2020 itself as the turning point, a year strange enough that it gave him the space and the excuse to finally step back and ask what he actually wanted to do next. The real question, though, is what happened next. Because losing a hit TV show doesn't automatically mean losing everything you built because of it. Life after the cameras. For anybody who was worried Gas Monkey Garage might have shut its doors along with the show, it didn't. Richard still owns and runs Gas Monkey Garage today, and the shop stayed busy documenting its daily work through YouTube and social media, the exact same channels that his old Discovery contract used to keep such a tight grip on. That freedom, the ability to just post a photo of a car whenever he wanted, without asking anyone's permission first, was apparently worth a lot to him. There's something almost satisfying about that shift. For years, one of Richard's biggest frustrations was not being able to control his own online presence. The moment his Discovery deal ended, one of the very first things he leaned into was exactly that. Building up his own YouTube channel and social media accounts, on his own terms, without a network standing in the way. It's the kind of thing that probably wouldn't have made headlines if he'd talked about it constantly while the show was still running. But it clearly mattered enough to him personally that it became one of the very first moves he made once he was finally free to make it. Richard didn't just keep doing the same old thing quietly either. In August of 2022, he posted a video announcing something pretty surprising. He was selling off nearly his entire classic car collection. He ended up selling 28 vehicles, bringing in more than $1 million total, keeping only a small handful of cars, including the very first car his garage ever built. His reasoning was refreshingly simple. He wanted different cars, the kind of vehicles he'd always personally wanted to own but never quite got around to. In the years since, he's used some of that money to build out a brand new collection, including buying several Ferrari Testarossas and expanding into exotic sports cars that have nothing to do with the rusty old classics that made him famous in the first place. Aaron Kaufman, meanwhile, went on to build his own path too, eventually launching a business specializing in restoring and customizing Ford F-100 pickup trucks, along with a handful of his own television projects over the years. Two guys who once built a hit show together, side by side in the same shop, ended up walking two completely different paths once the cameras finally stopped rolling. And both of them, in their own ways, seem to have landed somewhere they're genuinely happy to be. Does that change the way you look back on the show, knowing what was actually happening behind the scenes? And out of everything covered today, what surprised you the most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.